All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Omar ibn al-Khattab, 637 CE, the conquest of Jerusalem. We're talking about a moment that echoes through history, right?
Yo, absolutely. And you've sent over so much great material, articles, research. It's clear this is about so much more than just battles and territory.
It's about character. This guy, Omar, they called him Al-Faruq, the one who, what was it, distinguishes between right and wrong.
That's it. The one who distinguishes between right and wrong. Heavy stuff. I mean,
Right.
try living up to that title, and especially when you're in Omar's position.
Right, leading this rapidly expanding empire. We're talking Persia, Iraq, Syria, Egypt. He's not messing around.
Not at all. But then, Jerusalem. Think about what that city had already been through. Just 15 years before Omar arrives, the Byzantines had retaken it from the Persians. Brutally. We're talking massacres, desecration of holy sites.
Yeah, you can practically feel the tension, right? Like everyone's waiting for the next shoe to drop. And on top of that, Muslims at this time were praying towards Jerusalem.
Huge spiritual significance,
Yeah.
even before Omar gets there.
Huh.
And then, boom, word comes in. Jerusalem's ready to surrender. But there's a catch.
Oh, what's the catch?
The patriarch. He wants to deal with Omar directly. No intermediaries.
Bold move. So how does Omar respond? Does he march in with his whole army, banners flying, the whole emperor routine?
Nope. He takes one camel, one servant, and get this, they take turns walking. He literally splits the journey with his camel, 50-50.
You're kidding. This is the most powerful guy in the Islamic world, and he's basically on a budget pilgrimage.
Seriously. And it gets better. He shows up in Jerusalem, clothes are patched, dusty, covered in mud from, well, I guess a puddle he walked through.
And his companions are like, Omar, are you sure about this?
Something like that. But his response, it's incredible. He says, "We were a people whom Allah had honored with Islam. If we seek honor through anything else, Allah will humiliate us."
Whoa. That's pretty profound. It's like true honor comes from within,
Yeah.
not from how you look or how many soldiers you've got.
Exactly. And that sets the tone for the whole conquest. This isn't about domination. It's about establishing a just order. And that's where the Pact of Umar comes in.
A pact of Umar. Okay, so we're not talking about a typical we won, you lost scenario. There's an actual agreement here.
A formal agreement with the Christians of Jerusalem. It guarantees their safety, their property, their churches, even their crosses are protected.
Wow. Okay, so they're allowed to keep their faith, their places of worship.
Hmm.
That's pretty progressive for the 7th century, wouldn't you say?
Definitely ahead of its time. There's a tax, the jizya, but it was actually less than what Muslims paid in zakat.
Interesting. Still, I imagine some people weren't thrilled about paying any kind of tax to a new ruler.
Oh, of course. There were definitely complexities, power dynamics at play. But the Pact of Umar, it set this precedent for religious tolerance that had a huge impact on the Muslim world.
All right, it wasn't just about conquering. It was about building a system where different faiths could, actually function. And then there's that moment with the patriarch. Invites Omar to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Talk about symbolism. I mean, the leader of the conquering army invited to pray in the holiest site of the conquered religion.
And Omar's response is,
He declines.
he says no.
Yeah.
Why? I mean,
No.
talk about a power move, right? Praying in the enemy's most sacred space.
He actually says he doesn't want future generations using it as an excuse to lay claim to the church, thinking long term, avoiding potential conflict.
Wow. Okay, so if he didn't pray in the church, where did he go?
Nearby, prayed there. And guess what? A mosque was built on that very spot, Masjid Umar.
So you have this mosque standing just a stone's throw from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's kind of a powerful image, isn't it?
Definitely. Makes you wonder what would happen if Omar had prayed inside the church. Would history have unfolded differently?
Who knows? But one thing's for sure. Omar was playing the long game. He wasn't just interested in a quick victory. He was thinking about how to create a lasting peace. And speaking of lasting impact, we can't forget about the Adhan in Jerusalem.
Bilal.
Right, Bilal. The first muezzin, he'd vowed never to give the call to prayer again after the Prophet Muhammad died. Think about the grief, the sense of loss.
It's palpable. And then Omar, he sees this opportunity, this incredibly symbolic moment. He convinces Bilal to give the Adhan in Jerusalem, says it would honor the Prophet.
And so, after years of silence, the call to prayer rings out across the city. Must have been an incredibly powerful moment, especially for those who knew the Prophet.
It was a turning point, a new era for Jerusalem, cementing its place in Islamic history. And Omar, he doesn't stop there. He stays in the city for about 10 days, focuses on establishing order, setting up courts, appointing officials.
Really, so he's not just a conqueror, he's an administrator, a builder.
Absolutely. And then there's this story, almost too good to be true, but they say Omar, with his own hands, helped clean the Temple Mount alongside other Muslims.
Hold on, the emperor of this massive empire is cleaning up a garbage dump.
That's what it had become, neglected and desecrated under the Byzantines. But Omar, he saw it as an act of service, a gesture of respect.
It's like he's sending this message of humility, that true leadership isn't about lording it over others. It's about serving something greater than yourself.
Exactly. And that message, it resonated far beyond the walls of Jerusalem.
And it continues to resonate today, doesn't it? This idea of leadership rooted in service, in humility, in respect for others. Powerful stuff.
It really is. And we're just scratching the surface here. Omar's life, his leadership, it's full of these moments that make you rethink power, faith, justice.
Okay, I'm hooked. We got to keep going with this. Let's take a deeper look at the Pact of Umar, how that actually played out, the different perspectives on his rule.
I'm ready when you are. There's a lot more to unpack here. Omar's story, it's a deep dive in the truest sense. That image of Omar cleaning the Temple Mount, it really sticks with you, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, here's this emperor, right? Conquering lands, leading armies. But he gets down and dirty, literally, to show that true leadership is about service.
It's a powerful symbol, especially when you think about the Temple Mount itself, sacred to Jews, to Christians. And under Byzantine rule, it had been neglected, desecrated.
Yeah, they basically turned it into a garbage dump.
And that's what the sources say. And Omar, he's appalled by that. So he takes it upon himself to help restore it. This act of cleaning, it's not just about hygiene. It's about respect. It's about recognizing the shared history of these faiths.
It's like he's saying, look, we may have different beliefs, but we're all connected somehow. We all share this space.
Exactly. And that theme of shared heritage, it runs through a lot of Omar's actions in Jerusalem. Think about his decision not to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Right, he don't want to give anyone an excuse to claim it for Islam later on. He was thinking about the long game, about preventing future conflict.
Exactly. He understood that true peace, it's not just about signing a treaty, it's about fostering mutual respect, about building trust.
But even with all his efforts, there must have been some pushback, right? Not everyone would have been happy with the new order.
Oh, absolutely. It's important to remember that we're looking at history through a very specific lens. The sources we have, they tend to focus on Omar's positive qualities, but there were definitely other perspectives.
Whose voices are we missing then? Who might not have been so keen on Omar's vision?
Well, for starters, those who benefited from the old Byzantine rule, they lost power, status. Imagine how they felt about this new Muslim ruler coming in and shaking things up.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't go over too well. What about within the Muslim community itself? Was there any dissent there?
Almost certainly. Some might have questioned his decisions, his strategies. Maybe they disagreed with how he handled certain situations.
Right, there's always that internal debate. That's healthy, though, isn't it? Keeps everyone on their toes.
It is. And then, of course, you have the conquered populations, the Christians and Jews. They're the ones living under the Pact of Umar.
Which, on paper, seems pretty progressive. Protection, freedom of religion.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the reality?
It was a mixed bag, to be honest. Yes, the pact was groundbreaking for its time, but it was still a hierarchical system. Non-Muslims, they were tolerated, but they weren't equals.
They had to pay the jizya, the tax. They couldn't build new places of worship. They were subject to certain restrictions.
Exactly. And we have to remember, the sources we have, they're mostly written from the perspective of the victors. We don't always get to hear the voices of those who were on the receiving end of this conquest.
So it's important to read between the lines, to try and imagine what life was really like for those who lived under Omar's rule, good and bad.
Absolutely. And it's these nuances, these complexities that make history so fascinating. It's not just about dates and names. It's about real people grappling with real challenges.
It's about stories. And speaking of stories, there's one about Omar that's always kind of intrigued me, the whole mud puddle incident.
Yeah.
Right before he enters Jerusalem, he falls into this puddle and shows up all muddy and disheveled.
Ah, yes, that one. Well, some historians think it might be more of a parable than a literal event.
A parable? What do you mean?
Like a story designed to teach a lesson. In this case, the lesson is humility. Even the most powerful ruler, he's still human. He can still stumble, get dirty.
So it's not necessarily about whether it actually happened, it's about what it represents.
Exactly. It's about Omar's character, his humility, his lack of pretension. And those qualities, they weren't just a PR stunt. Even sources from his own time talk about his piety, his sense of justice.
So this wasn't just some image he cultivated for the masses. This is who he really was.
That's what the sources suggest. And that combination of military skill and moral character, it made him a very effective leader. He wasn't just about conquering, he was about building something that would last.
He understood that true power comes from respect, from trust, not from fear or force.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was back then.
Okay, so we've talked about the Pact of Umar, the different perspectives on his rule, even the mud puddle incident. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that I want to explore: the spiritual significance of Jerusalem.
Ah, yes. The city at the heart of three major religions, a place where faith and history collide.
For Muslims, it was the direction of prayer. For Christians, it's the site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. And for Jews, it's the location of the temple, the center of their faith for centuries.
Yeah.
You got all these layers of meaning, all these competing claims.
It's a city that embodies the idea of the sacred. And for Omar, conquering Jerusalem wasn't just a military victory, it was a deeply symbolic act.
He was stepping into a narrative that was already centuries in the making. So how did he navigate that? How did he, as a Muslim leader, approach a city that was so important to other faiths?
One of the ways he did this was by emphasizing the shared Abrahamic heritage of the three religions. He recognized that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace their roots back to the prophet Abraham.
So instead of focusing on what divided them, he highlighted what they had in common.
Exactly. It was a brilliant move, both strategically and symbolically. By emphasizing this shared heritage, he created a space for dialogue, for understanding.
And we see this in his actions, right? Refusing to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, helping to clean the Temple Mount. These were acts of respect, gestures of recognition toward the other faiths.
They were, and while the specifics of those stories might be debated, they reflect a larger truth about Omar's approach. He wasn't just interested in conquest. He wanted to create a society where different faiths could coexist.
He was setting a precedent, a model for interfaith relations. But did it last? I mean, we know that the history of Jerusalem is full of conflict, of violence. So what happened to Omar's vision?
Well, that's a complicated question, and one that we're going to dive into after the break. Because the story of Jerusalem, it doesn't end with Omar. It's a story that continues to unfold, for better or worse, right up to the present day.
Okay, so Omar's vision of a multi-faith Jerusalem, did it stand the test of time?
Well, let's just say history had other plans. Omar's conquest, it happened in the 7th century. And just a few centuries later, you have this massive upheaval, the Crusades.
Had the Crusades. Talk about a turning point. Suddenly you have these armies from Europe marching into the Holy Land, determined to reclaim it for Christendom.
And they weren't exactly known for their tolerance, were they? The Crusades, they brought a new level of violence, of religious fanaticism to the region. It really shattered that fragile peace that Omar had tried to establish.
It's like this huge setback, right? After centuries of relative coexistence, suddenly you have this eruption of bloodshed and hatred.
And the effects of that, they were long-lasting. Even after the Crusader states were pushed back, the scars remained. The relationship between Muslims, Christians, Jews, it was never quite the same.
It's like this cycle of violence starts, and it's hard to break free from it.
That's exactly what we see happening in Jerusalem over the centuries. Periods of relative peace, followed by outbreaks of conflict, and often those conflicts were fueled by more than just religious differences.
Right, there's always a political dimension, too. Power struggles, territorial ambitions.
Absolutely. Jerusalem, it's always been the strategic prize. And the people living there, they often got caught in the crossfire.
So Omar's vision, this idea of peaceful coexistence, it gets lost in all the chaos.
Not entirely. I think his legacy, it continued to inspire people even in the midst of conflict. But the reality on the ground, it was often much more complicated.
And that complexity, it continues to this day, doesn't it? The status of Jerusalem, it's still one of the most contentious issues in the world.
It is. And it's a reminder that history, it doesn't just stay in the past. It shapes our present in ways we might not even realize.
So what can we learn from all this? From Omar's story, from the long and complicated history of Jerusalem?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that peace, it's not something you achieve once and for all. It's something you have to work at constantly. And it takes more than just good intentions. It takes real effort, real dialogue, real understanding.
And it takes courage, too. The courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult.
Absolutely. Omar, he showed that courage. He wasn't perfect, but he was willing to challenge the status quo to try and build a better world. And that's something we can all learn from, no matter what our background, no matter what our beliefs.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Seeing beyond our differences and finding that common ground.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not just about learning about the past, it's about connecting with something bigger than ourselves. It's about understanding the forces that shape our world and finding inspiration to make a difference in our own time.
Well said. And on that note, folks, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Omar ibn al-Khattab. It's been a journey through conquest, through peacemaking, through the complexities of faith and power.
A journey that's left us with a lot to think about.
Absolutely. So keep those brainwaves buzzing, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep searching for those moments of connection, of understanding that can help us build a better world. Until next time, take care.